Hi, this is Helen from CARTO. Today I'm going to be trying out CARTO's newest tool, CARTO Workflows. So this is a new tool that helps you run spatial analysis and automate loads of different analytical processes in a very visual user interface, kind of like a flow diagram. So this is really useful if you want to undertake complex spatial analysis, but you're not very confident with maybe SQL or Python or R. This video is genuinely the first time that I'm trying out CARTO Workflows, so I'm hoping you can see how easy it is. Today we're going to be using CARTO Workflows to do a really simple bit of spatial analysis. We're going to be looking at Crossrail, which is a new train line in the UK, and we're going to be looking specifically at Crossrail stations and seeing if we can extract census areas which are within a certain distance of Crossrail stations, which is really, really useful for doing all sorts of analysis with census demographic data. So let's get started. So this is what the CARTO workspace looks like. Eagle-eyed viewers might notice there's something a little bit different when you have workflows enabled, which is we have now the workflows tab. So let's open that up and create our first workflow. And you can see this is my first workflow as well. So first of all, we need to select a connection. Let's do that here. And this will open and create a new workflow, which we can see here. So the two first things to be aware of are there are two main features here. We have sources and components. So sources are your projects and your data sets and your tables. And this is where you can access basically all of your data. And then components, which I'll go into a bit more detail later on, is all of your analysis and geoprocessing and data management tools. So first of all, let's go back into sources and navigate to our stations data, which is under here. And we've extracted this from OpenStreetMap. So let's just load that in. It'll take a couple of seconds just to initialize. And once we have a dataset loaded in, what we can actually do is down here, open up this panel and we can get all sorts of information here. Results, messages, and SQL really relate to your workflows and your analysis. But when we have datasets loaded in here, we can also preview them. So we can have a look at the table behind the data. And we can also view the data in a map itself. So that's often a good thing to do when you're starting a workflow, just to check that the data is what you're expecting it to be. So the first thing we need to do is run some buffers on our data to establish our station catchments. So let's move into components and we can just search for buffers. And here we have ST-buffer, which is the tool we need. So if you're a SQL user, you'll probably notice that a lot of the language and components in here are similar to as they would be in SQL, and that's just because a lot of this is built on SQL. So ST-buffer, what we need to do is select our input, our stations to the buffer, and you can now see that our geometry column has been filled with the geometry of the stations, and then we can just change our distance to whatever distance we want. I'm going to input 1600 meters, which is about a 20-minute walk. That should create our buffers, our sort of circles around our stations. So now what we need to do is input our census data. So let's move back to our sources and load in our LSOAs, which stands for lower super output areas, which is a kind of small census geography in the UK. It's quite a complex data set, so you can see it took a couple more seconds to load in, but let's just take a look at that in a map to check that's what we expected. So yeah, these are what LSOAs look like. You can see they're quite complex, which means they can't necessarily all load at the same time. So now what we need to do is create our spatial filters. So again, let's go into our components and search for filter. You can see there's two types, simple, which is based on the variables in your table, and spatial, which is based on spatial relationships. So let's bring that in. And now what we need to do is just connect our inputs. So we want our source data set to be our LSOAs, and we want our filter data set to be our buffers. So now you can see in the parameters here under spatial buffer, we're filtering our LSOA geometries by the geometries of our buffers, and we're using the predicate intersects, which is basically if there's any overlap at all between these two data sets, then it will return true, and that will return those features for us. So the final thing we're going to do is just output this to a table. So there's a few really useful tools in here under import and export. So for example, you can import data from a URL. You can also export data as a table or by email. I'm going to export this as a table. So let's just connect the results, the output of our filter to our table. So now finally, all we need to do is input where we want to export our tables to. So I'm just going to save this in this location and give this the name LSOA output, which is a terrible name, and you should never name your datasets as badly as that. And then we just need to click run and wait for the results. So you can see in the messages here, it's telling us that the execution started. We can see how long it's taking up here. So we'll just give that a few seconds. And you can see that took about 13 seconds, which really isn't long at all. You can see we've got the messages here saying the workflow has started and being completed. And we can take a look at the outputs. So we can have a look at the table. So this is what the output looks like. And we can have a look at that in map form as well, just to check that we are happy with the results of our analysis and it's what we're expecting. And what we can also do is have a look at the interim steps as well, if that's interesting to us. So we can have a look at the buffers, for example, by selecting those. And you can see those 1600 meter buffers in there. So that was a really quick run through of CARTO Workflows. I found it super intuitive, really, really easy to use. I think my favorite part of it was being able to visualize my data and visualize different steps of the analysis as I was going, which really helped to validate my results and help me understand my results, which was really helpful. I'm quite a big SQL user. I really like using spatial SQL, but I can definitely see myself using this quite a lot. It's really helpful for someone like me who's very typo prone or can end up spending a lot of time trying to find like row commas or brackets in my code, which isn't possible with workflows. So I think that'll be really helpful. So if you want to try this yourself, you can go over to the CARTO website. I'll also put a link in the comments and try out a free trial yourself. And yeah, I hope you found this interesting. Please do give me a follow at Helen Makes Maps, and thank you.